Well, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Neeta Sonalkar. I'm the Director of Higher Education Innovation at Benefits Data Trust, and I am so excited to be here with all of you today to share more about our toolkit that we released last month. As I mentioned before, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available later on our website so that you can access it or share it with colleagues who weren't able to join us today. If you are having any tech issues, please feel free to reach out to the email address you see on your screen, communications@bdtrust.org, and somebody will help you out. And then finally, I want to mention that at the end of this webinar, we're going to have time for Q&A from the audience. If you have a question that you would like to submit, please submit your question in the Q&A function, which is in the center of your taskbar below. That is where we are going to be looking for questions for our panelists. If you put it in the chat, we might miss it. So if you have a question, be sure to put it in the Q&A box. And then finally, if we don't get to your question today, you can always email us at highered@bdtrust.org, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Pauline Abernathy, our Chief Strategy Officer, for some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Neeta, and welcome to everyone who's attending today. Thank you so much for making the time. We're excited to talk about our new toolkit and for you to hear from our wonderful group of panelists. I'm Pauline Abernathy, Chief Strategy Officer at Benefits Data Trust. Since we released the toolkit you'll be hearing about today about a month ago, have received just a tremendous response. More than 500 people have registered for today's webinar from nearly every state in the country. A little over half of you are from higher education institutions, about a quarter from nonprofit organizations of all different types. Just as the colleges span the entire spectrum of types of colleges. And almost 10% are from government, federal, state, and local government. The response to this toolkit really reflects the widespread recognition that every college campus has students that are struggling to meet their basic needs. And that in many campuses, it's a lot of students who are struggling to meet their basic needs, and that there is tremendous interest from both institutions of higher education and government in steps that can be taken to connect these students to the literally billions of dollars of untapped assistance available for them. I don't need to tell any of you that this is a critical moment for higher education. Enrollment is still down since the start of the pandemic, especially among low-income students and African-American students, Latino students, and institutions have felt the consequences. Affordability continues to be a major concern for virtually every student. And with the end of the public health emergency declaration, policies are about to change, which will also have effects on both institutions and students, which you'll be hearing more about today. BDT, Benefits Data Trust, is a national nonprofit devoted to creating smarter ways to connect people to benefits and services using technology, data, and policy. There is literally over $80 billion of assistance for food, healthcare, and other basic needs that goes untapped every year. And that includes more than $3 billion in food assistance for college students who are not participating in SNAP. That is money that can help students pay for the non-tuition costs of college that are often make up a majority of the costs of college and are so critical for students to be able to enroll and complete. When I came to BDT from the world of higher education policy, from both the Institute for College Access and Success and previously the Department of Education, I knew BDT had a role to play in helping connect college students to the assistance for which they're eligible. And I'm so excited for us to be able to share the expertise we have from nearly 20 years of streamlining access to benefits in states across the country and to try to help connect college students and support colleges in connecting students to the assistance they need. We've seen so many amazing examples of what colleges are doing already on their campuses to address these issues, but it's so clear that more is needed. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be with you all today. I want to thank Comcast, NBC Universal, who provided grant support that made this toolkit possible. Also want to thank our fabulous advisory council, which brought really valuable insights to inform this toolkit. And finally, to thank the talented BDT staff that put it together. Now I'll turn it back to Neeta.
Thank you so much, Pauline. So to kick us off, I thought we'd start with a quick preview of what we'll be talking about today. I'll start by giving a quick intro to BDT so you can learn a little bit more about who we are and what we do. I'll then cover a little bit about the current context around student basic needs and benefits access. And then I'll hand it over to my colleague, Stephanie Baker, the mind behind the toolkit, to walk us through the resource and highlight a few of the tools. We'll then bring on our three wonderful panelists, next slide, to hear how they're tackling student basic needs on their campuses and how data plays a role in their efforts. And then we'll finish up by taking some questions from the audience. So a little bit about BDT. We are a national nonprofit, as Pauline mentioned, that works to improve people's access to benefit programs. And for the last nearly 20 years, our entire mission has been to help people live healthier, more independent lives by creating smarter ways to access benefits and services. And the way that we do that is by partnering with state agencies, healthcare organizations, and now higher ed institutions to conduct data-driven outreach to people who are eligible for programs but unenrolled, and then deliver screening and application assistance by phone. We also work with government agencies to inform policy solutions to help change the whole system so it works better for everybody and streamline access. Since 2005, we've screened well over 1 million households and secured over $10 billion in benefits to help families pay for food, healthcare, housing, and other basic needs. The reason we do this work is because of what Pauline mentioned. There is a huge gap. Each year, we estimate that $80 billion, more than $80 billion in federal benefits goes untapped by people who are eligible for support but unenrolled. And this includes money that could help people pay for healthcare, high-speed internet, food and groceries, and tuition expenses. BDT's higher ed work is a relatively newer focus for us, and we decided to start building out supports for colleges and students over the past few years to respond to a serious need, which I think many on this call are all too familiar with, and many of you actually experience in your daily work. We know that today's college students face significant barriers to completing their degrees on time, and we know that that has many financial and economic downstream effects. Completion rates just aren't where we'd like to see them, and they've suffered even more during the pandemic. A big part of that attrition has to do with affordability, which is no surprise. Recent studies have shown the prevalence of food and housing insecurity on our campuses. And the fact that so many of you on this call are working on basic needs and security on your campuses with students is just a testament to how this issue is persistent and ongoing. And then finally, we know that college students look really different than they did 50 years ago. One of the reasons there is ongoing enormous need is because we know that students are balancing so many obligations beyond just their obligations into the classroom. So what can we do to help? We know benefits has a role to play, but like the $80 million gap, there are gaps for students as well. Each year, $3 billion in SNAP benefits are left on the table by eligible students who don't claim the benefit. And similarly, over 5 million students actually qualify for the new Affordable Connectivity Program, which could help them pay for high-speed internet, which we know is such a critical resource for succeeding in the classroom. And there are many reasons for these gaps, but primarily many students just don't know about the benefits, or they don't think they're eligible, or maybe some of their colleges don't know that either. And of course, as many of you will know, it is really, really difficult to reach students who don't raise their hand or proactively seek out support. And this is why targeted outreach is so necessary. I also want to just highlight why this work is so timely by focusing on a change to SNAP rules that is coming up very soon. So during the public health emergency, 2 temporary rules made it a lot easier for students to qualify for SNAP. This rule is going to end on June 10th, 30 days after the end of the public health emergency declaration. And what this means is that some students may not be eligible for SNAP anymore, but actually many others will continue to be eligible under the regular rules. But the only way they're going to know that is if somebody tells them, and this is where targeted outreach based on data comes in. It's worth mentioning that the USDA, which funds the SNAP program, has actually encouraged states to screen students before they roll off, just in case they qualify under the regular rules, and also to work with colleges to conduct outreach to eligible students. And so finally, I hope by now you're convinced that states and colleges should be doing more proactive data-driven outreach to eligible students, but here's why they can. Institutions actually hold a fair amount of data that either directly correspond with benefits eligibility or indirectly indicate likely eligibility. So there's a lot that institutions can be doing. And then finally, the Department of Ed last January issued guidance to institutions encouraging them to use FAFSA data to perform this outreach because of its connection to the administration of several federal benefit programs. And that is why we created the toolkit that we're about to take a look at. So I'm going to pass it off to Stephanie Baker, our higher education engagement manager.
Thank you, Neeta. I want to start just by sharing some information from our webinar registration, where we asked about your familiarity with student benefits eligibility and acknowledge that we have folks kind of all over the spectrum here that are very new or very seasoned in dealing with student benefits, and that we're really glad you're here wherever you are at in your journey today. For a little bit of background on the toolkit, I just want to share, we created it to fill a gap. So guidance like the Dear Colleague letter that Neeta mentioned affirms that colleges can use their data to reach out to students about benefits. What we wanted to create was a really practical resource to help colleges know how to do that and to understand what data they hold that is relevant. The toolkit itself is focused a bit on undergraduate students. That's not to say other student populations can't qualify for benefits, but you'll see that reflected in some of the data elements. So I just want to acknowledge that. The toolkit is a free resource for institutions to identify students, and it's the first installment in what will be a 3-part series. So here and today, we're focused on leveraging data to find eligible students. Our next installments will focus on effective outreach, and then finally on data sharing strategies to streamline students' access to benefits. Our objectives for the toolkit are to help colleges leverage the data they hold to identify students who could be eligible for the following benefit programs. I'm going to talk about the benefits and what they each mean and the value of these benefits in a minute. We focused on 5 federal benefits here because we wanted the toolkit to be relevant for colleges and universities in any state. Our second objective is to build institutional capacity to conduct targeted outreach that raises awareness and connects students to screening and benefit application support. So just briefly, for the 5 benefits we cover in the toolkit, we wanted to share a little bit about the value of those benefits for students in need, for anyone who might be familiar with any one of these programs. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, provides an average of $130 a month toward food and groceries. That's going to vary a little bit by household size and by state, but just to give you an idea of what that could mean for a student in need of food assistance. The Affordable Connectivity Program provides discounted high-speed broadband assistance. So that's up to a $30 a month discount and up to $75 a month on qualifying tribal lands, in addition to a discounted electronic device. The Child Tax Credit provides up to $2,000 a year per child in the form of a tax credit, with $1,500 of that amount being refundable, so money right into a parenting student's pocket to help them meet basic costs. Medicaid, which provides free or low-cost health coverage, and WIC, which it provides supplemental foods in the value of around $50 a month, in addition to nutrition education, formula for babies, and breastfeeding support. Since in the higher ed world, we often think about financial need in terms of Pell dollars, we wanted to share that combining a Pell grant with other benefits a student is eligible for could essentially double a student's financial assistance for getting through college. So we have 2 examples here. On the left is a single student receiving just under a $6,900 a year Pell Grant that could qualify for an additional $8,500 a year in other benefits, bringing the total amount of assistance they get to just over $15,000 a year. And on the right, we have an example, single and unmarried parenting student with one child receiving the same amount in a Pell Grant and up to $15,000 a year from other benefit programs. So that's just to give you an idea of the degree to which this can help students increase their support for meeting basic needs. I want to talk briefly about our methodology for coming up with the data elements that we include in the toolkit. So to come up with data elements, we used both direct indicators of eligibility as well as indirect indicators of eligibility. Direct indicators are things that we identified from FAFSA or financial aid data that clearly let us know a student is eligible for benefits. So an example is that all Pell Grant recipients are eligible for the Affordable Connectivity Program to receive that broadband assistance. And then some of the indirect indicators of eligibility are things like reporting children or dependents on the FAFSA. That's a pretty good indicator that a student could qualify for WIC and the child tax credit. Some additional indicators of possible benefits eligibility. We used research on basic needs and security. We know that certain groups of students, like single parents, students who have experienced homelessness, are at greater risk for basic needs and security. So we looked at what data that colleges might have on the FAFSA or in other places in their systems to identify those student populations for outreach. And then finally, we looked at common college and university services that address basic needs, things like food pantries, clothing closets, as places where institutions could potentially get data and conduct outreach to students who are using those services to connect them with benefits. I'm going to dig into a little bit about what the toolkit actually looks like. So this is the landing page on our website, and we're going to drop that link in the chat. So if you haven't checked it out yet, definitely encourage you to take a look. The toolkit itself includes an introduction and 8 practical tools in the form of downloadable worksheets. The first section we called Start Strong, and that's really about building a foundation to do this work. We know it's really critical to understand the landscape of a given campus, what's already happening with basic needs or benefits, and to set goals, and really importantly, to bring in other campus staff members to support this kind of effort and build a good campus team to do this work. The second section, which we call Prepare Data, really dives into the core of the work. It is set up to help colleges and universities understand which data elements they have access to that are relevant for identifying students for benefits outreach, then helping them understand how those data elements correlate to likely eligibility for each benefit program we cover in the toolkit. And then finally, a visual guide to think through the steps involved in pulling and compiling data lists to actually outreach to students. And then lastly is our Implement and Evaluate section. The action planning tool gets into a list of specific steps to plan and implement this work, while the evaluation tool is a resource for documenting learnings and as well as what could be improved for future efforts. So I'm going to preview 3 of our tools here for you today, but of course, we hope you dive into them more deeply on our website if you haven't already. The first one I'm going to talk about is tool 3, what we call Build Your Campus Team. We wanted to highlight that today because despite that sometimes campus departments can feel a little siloed, we know that none of the work that institutions do to support students can happen in a vacuum. So this tool first walks the user through thinking through which staff or departments are needed to plan or carry out this work of identifying students for benefits outreach. It includes a chart that was a bit too large to include on our slides here, but that chart names many different departments that might be relevant to this work and what kind of role they could play, so that when you're walking through the toolkit, you can start to think about what campus partners are going to be needed in your given context. The second section of this same tool is a resource for crafting a pitch to recruit others on a campus into supporting this work. So this includes considerations like what to include when crafting a pitch, talking points, potential research articles that you might want to cite when you're trying to build a case for doing this kind of work on your campus. Tool 4, which we called Explore Available Data, actually walks you through the data elements that colleges have or could have that are useful for identifying students who could be eligible for benefits. So the left-hand column here shows the relevant data element. The next column identifies what department owns it, followed by where it's stored, who can pull the data, and then finally whether it's accessible for this work. So the idea here is for college staff to work through and determine which data elements are feasible to access. We know that some data likely live in different systems and different departments, and that's okay. They don't all need to be available to do this work. This is just the starting place to figure out what's going to work on a given campus. There's a rationale document on our website that goes into deeper detail about the data elements that were chosen to include or exclude on this document. So if you're interested in deeper detail, I would encourage you to take a look at that. And then this is still tool 4. You'll see that many of these are financial aid or FAFSA related data, but as you get further into the tool, you'll see things that are not. So we included examples like accessing an on-campus food pantry, receiving meal swipe donations, applying for emergency aid. The tool goes further and gives space for an institution to brainstorm other data that they might hold on their campus that could be relevant. And the idea here is to capture students not just through financial aid data. We know that not all students complete the FAFSA. You may have undocumented or other student populations on your campus that are not necessarily completing a FAFSA, and we want to be able to connect those students with support as well. So I'll also add, for campuses that are thinking about supporting undocumented students, there is a resource along with Tool 4 on our website called Serving Immigrant Students that you'll want to take a closer look at. And then finally, after completing tool 4, not finally, but finally for today, the ones that I'm going to preview, after completing tool 4, tool 5 will help a team choose what benefits make sense to do outreach on, depending on their given campus and what data elements they can access. So I'll just note at the top here, we include a tip on focusing on 1 to 2 benefit programs to start if this is a campus's first foray into supporting students and doing outreach around benefits access. We want this work to be feasible, and it's always possible to build on over time. And then each row in the chart on this toolkit walks through one of the benefits covered in the toolkit, and it gives some information about what the benefit actually provides, who on your campus could be eligible for that benefit, and what data we recommended from tool 4 to actually include in building an outreach list of students to get outreach about that particular benefit. And finally, a place to denote yes or no, or maybe we're thinking about whether we're going to do outreach for that particular benefit on a campus. I am going to pass it back to Neeta to facilitate our panel, and I would be happy to take questions on the toolkit a little bit later.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Now that you've gotten a chance to see parts of the toolkit, I really hope that everyone goes and checks it out, and I think we have dropped the link into the chat. We are now going to bring our wonderful panelists up to start our discussion. We've got 2. I think we're bringing on a 3rd. There we go. There we go. So before we get started, I'd love to give a brief introduction to our panelists. I will be brief, so I won't be able to cover even a fraction of their many accomplishments and talents, but I will do my best here. So first, we have Angela Johnson. She serves as the Vice President of Access and Completion at Cuyahoga Community College, where she's been since 2000. Angela is recognized as a national leader in enrollment services and financial aid, and her leadership led to the college receiving the Terry O'Banion Award from the National Council on Student Development and the Innovation of the Year Award from the League of Innovation. So welcome, Angela. Next, we have Dr. Mary Utter. She serves as the Dean of Students at the Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. In this role, she focuses on student advocacy and success and oversees programs and resources to connect students with basic needs to college and community resources. Welcome, Mary. So happy to have you today. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Rashida Crutchfield. She is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Cal State Long Beach, so from the West Coast, a different time zone here. And she's also the executive director of the Center for Equitable Higher Education, which is dedicated to studying and promoting economic, food, and housing justice. Welcome to all 3 of you. So wonderful to have you here. And I will also state for our audience that the 3 of you were on our Toolkit Advisory Council. So thank you very much for helping to shape this wonderful resource that we all now have access to. I want to start off with a question for Angela. Angela, you've been a leader in student benefits access for many years now, and I think Tri-C has really been on the forefront. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your personal journey at Tri-C addressing student basic needs and security.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. I think I'd like to talk about, you mentioned in my bio in terms of my experience in financial aid. I like to think I grew up in financial aid because after 30 years of higher ed experience, I spent at least 2/3 of that in the financial aid world, doing a lot of focused work around that. And so when we were really invited to participate, focused on benefits access, it was really, it was different. There was a lot of skepticism on my part in our institution and trying to really figure this out related to all the regulations that we know we're dealing with financial aid, and kind of adding one more complexity of that, looking at both our state and then our county services around benefits and understanding and learning those. And we asked our students a lot about what the journey should look like for them, and trying to deal with ideas around the stigma associated with applying for benefits, ways in which benefits will help support students. And we didn't start in the financial aid office. We actually started our experience in career services, because I think the initial thought was that individuals who might be looking for funding might be looking for a part-time job. So that might be a place to do that. And at that time, 12 years ago or so, that's when you had the long financial aid lines. And then we were, I think there was a concern about trying to connect folks to benefits sooner and quicker without kind of dealing with all the other, what appeared to be bureaucracy of financial aid, if you will. Certainly no lines now, things are very, very different. But I think what we did is when we moved it, integrated into financial aid, we really kind of moved on a journey that helped us all as an institution, and certainly then our students, to think about this a little bit differently, integrating the services, synergizing the support in ways that I like to now think about. When you come to the financial aid office, it's you're talking about a grant, a scholarship, benefits. So it's all integrated in a way, because this is all about funding and helping students with indirect costs for their education. And so it's integrated in a way that students don't have to feel uncomfortable about asking the questions. We kind of help students open the door to those conversations based on information that they share with us. So we started off a little concerned about how complex it might be. And then we have moved way past that over the years to really think about how it's integrated, how it helps support students from a temporary support to help them. So as they finish their education, receive a better paying job, that this is an opportunity for them for a transition period. But we certainly started off a little bit concerned about what that looks like, but we had a lot of learning to do as a college, and we certainly had a lot of learning to do as a team to help students and help everybody be comfortable with how we help students to manage the opportunity that this provides for them in their education.
Great, thank you, Angela. And what a great way to start us off. Financial aid offices have such a critical role to play in this work, and it is not something, I would say, culturally that every financial aid office is really used to. So really helpful to hear about your experiences. Mary, my next question is for you, and I love that this is a follow-up, because I think you are not from a financial aid office and sort of looking at the work from a very different lens. But I'm curious, for institutions who are new to benefits access work or using data to connect students to benefits, what do you recommend as some first easy steps that an institution can take that still feel impactful and a good step in the right direction?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So I think CCAC, like any institution, right, you start out in sort of an ad hoc fashion and you build from there. So, for us, I think we identified needs by students coming forward, right? Those one-on-one conversations that our faculty and our advisors and our success coaches were having with students, where students were sharing their needs. And then those would get elevated, right? So those would end up in, say, a dean of students office to say, well, how can we help the student? What can we do? And so kind of starting from that as the lens of like, okay, here's the initial work that we need to do to support student success, which I think we're all in the business of doing, right? And then identifying your community resources and your folks either at the college or in your community that can help when those things come up. So when a student needs assistance, regardless of what it is, right? Who's your community? Who's your network? We were fortunate enough at CCAC a few years ago. We had been doing that work. We had success coaches and other advisors that had kind of stepped up to self-educate themselves on how to help students to connect to benefits. But we were able to get some grant funding to sort of proof of concept. And what that grant funding did was it allowed us to hire 3 full-time folks to focus on access to benefits, access to resources, called our resource navigators. And so with that grant funding, we were able to then start moving into a space where we could case manage students, where we could do outreach, where we could go and visit classes, right? Go into a first-year SEM class and say, these are some of the things that we can offer. And so those were sort of our baby steps, right? But what we've realized recently and tried to work towards is moving from that reactive to the proactive. So not just reacting to the students that find us or happen to get into somebody's office or happen to get the ear of someone who can help them, but doing that proactive outreach so that those opportunities are presented to as many students as possible. And so that's really where the data starts to come in, right? Because to do that, how do you identify those groups that are likely in need of or could benefit from these types of services, and then proactively outreach to them? And we were able to do that work too, because we have the staff to manage the caseload, right? So we can do the proactive outreach, and then in our institution, right, we can manage that in-house with our 3 resource navigators. But if it's not your own people, right, who in your community, right, is it, what nonprofit could you refer to, or what case management system could you use? So just thinking about, you know, that initial move from reactive to proactive, and just taking those little baby steps is kind of how we did it.
That's great. Thank you for that. I love that idea of moving from reactive to proactive, because you really can't reach all the students who have need until you start doing that. Rashida, I think you are our official researcher on this panel, although I like to think we are all researchers at heart in this work. What role can research play in supporting student basic needs efforts on your campus?
I'll take the official role, but I think we're already hearing from Mary and Angela how their engagement with data really, drives practice. And I want to reiterate, thank you for having me here. Happy to be here with all the folks out there virtually from the West Coast. Research really is, I think, fundamental in every layer of how we address basic needs and security. Higher ed is relatively new into the space of really seeing students holistically. We really, in the K-12 system, have known for a long time that students needed to eat and be housed in order to learn. And somehow we just thought that all of those things got resolved once they graduated from high school, but we know that's not logical. And so really shifting our perspectives in higher education has in some ways been driven by research. So we know at the very beginning, we've had a lot of prevalence studies that helped us understand that this is a problem for our students, that it is not a rite of passage for students to suffer in order to get a degree of some kind. And we also, as Mary pointed out, really have learned through the use of data that we can outreach to students proactively. And we also learn, I think Marco had a question about stigma, and the toolkit and our initiatives to outreach to students in a way that doesn't suggest that they perform their poverty, but we reward them for their persistence. And that, shows up in the data, in how we ask students what they need and how they identify. We know that a lot of students who experience homelessness from research don't use that word, but yet can utilize the support of the range of opportunities we have on campus and in public social services. I think where sometimes we can fall down is moving into practice with a shallow understanding. So we come from these academically rich environments, and yet sometimes we lean into a charity model, again, requiring students to perform their poverty to get access to supports and services. And data allows us to understand that we can be nimble in higher education. We can be creative in higher education and not fall into a charity model that is restrictive in how we approach our students. I think the work that really needs to be done more of, and what we're doing with the Center for Equitable Higher Education and other academics across the country, is to look at the implementation process and outcomes. Because very easily we can decide about what feels good in terms of how to support students, but we really have to think about and evaluate and assess whether what we're doing is working. And evaluation and research and assessment can be both formative, because we can move while we work and have research help inform what we're doing and look at what is working. And that really is important. I think what's yet another thing that's notable about what Mary mentioned is that having access to funds to support that research, to support the development of programs and services, is really important. A lot of times we might get an allocation for practice, but no allocation for research. And that really has to be part and parcel with how we engage students and how we make sure that we are really fulfilling our mission around student success.
Great, those really, really helpful comments. Would love to bring this back and maybe provide a bit of an example. So Angela, I'm hoping you can talk us through what role has data played in Tri-C's efforts to connect more students to benefits, sort of paint that picture for us.
Sure. Yeah. Back to financial aid, right? So what we did is we looked specifically at student information on the FAFSA. So as students complete the FAFSA, we made some assumptions, but part of that is that they told us whether or not they received benefits. We like to think most of that information is accurate, but we know sometimes students underreport their benefits they're receiving externally on the FAFSA. But what we did was we used the information on the FAFSA, determined students who could be likely eligible. We did outreach to those students by providing a link to them. It's like a survey link about information of interest. So are you interested in housing? Are you housing insecure? You need information around that, or food insecurity. And then they were invited then to meet with a peer financial coach, is what we call them, through our process and evolution, so that they can help them to connect with benefits. In Ohio, we have what at that time was called the Ohio Benefits Bank, and it allowed individuals to apply for benefits online. And we had coaches who were trained by our local food bank to really help support the work and the service of our peer financial coaches. So we use the FAFSA data from an initial perspective. That was one point of data we looked at. And then we also have an emergency fund program. And so individuals who may have been interested in an emergency fund, apply for emergency fund, we use that as a point of opportunity to share with information about to the students about other benefits, looking at more long-term beyond the emergency fund. And we did something similar around professional development. So individuals who may have experienced a loss of income, we help them to understand, hey, are you familiar with benefits that you might be eligible for, utility assistance, et cetera. And so we used the information that students shared with us to open up the door and open up the conversation. But we did absolutely start with the FAFSA. Certainly our challenge is we wish 100% of our students completed the FAFSA, and they don't. And so really trying to understand ways in which we can connect with students, not just our credit students, but our non-credit programs who don't complete the FAFSA, in ways in which we can get information and gather information from those students. But those were some ways that we really kind of started the conversation and opened the door. And certainly, like Mary said, we work very closely with our faculty, and then asking the faculty to put information in their syllabi that connects them back to the services and resources on our website that links to some of the county and statewide services. But yeah, the FAFSA was really important for the work that we did, because we knew that those students would have demonstrated need, that we can actually help support them in other benefits and services.
Great, super helpful. And thank you for making that distinction between students who complete the FAFSA and then non-completers. That is such a big issue. We know not all students complete the FAFSA. It's one of the first questions we get whenever we start talking about the toolkit. So super, super important to think about both of those populations. And of course, we may face some uncertainty later this year as the FAFSA changes and there will be additional barriers to completion. Mary, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the matter, but also would love to hear a little bit about how you've worked to get buy-in from leadership in other departments around this work as you've sort of sitting in your position from the Student Affairs Office.
Yeah, I think it's about, I think part of this conversation is not about also about getting buy-in, but also reducing stigma even within our community of faculty and staff, but really talking to those audiences to help them understand how the goals of like a benefits access program is the same as their goals of retention, student success, right? Outcomes. So, with faculty, similar to K through 12, where we often talk about how do we expect children to sit in school hungry, right? The same thing applies to college students. They're not going to be able to focus on your class if they don't have enough food to feed their family. They don't know where they're sleeping tonight, right? They can't afford the transportation to get anywhere. So I think that helping faculty to see that while we understand how important the work is in their course, that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? My colleagues will laugh because that's in like every presentation I do. We got to talk about the basics. And so I think once you kind of highlight it in that way, we've had great buy-in from our faculty. We make it easy. We have an easy referral system for them, which I think helps. They can place an alert, they can contact us directly. And so when students present those kinds of needs in the classroom, we make it easy for the faculty to say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. I know how difficult that is. I have a person that I can connect you with that can help. And so making that really easy and streamlined. And then I think from an administrative perspective, we know that when we think about institutional goals, academic outcomes, retention, persistence, graduation, right? All of those things are going to go up the more we can help to connect students to the services that they need. No longer can we say, you're just a student in this classroom, in this space, right? That holistic approach that somebody mentioned is really how we're going to get more students not only in our doors, but then out our doors and on to what's next. So I think that it's a really compelling argument. The challenge is always, it's a different way of thinking about the work that we do. And so, I've heard a lot of colleagues talk about, financial aid, right? That's one, the FAFSA, FERPA. How do we get past these barriers? How do we share data? How do we use this? And this is different than what we've normally done, right? Because we tend to see our student information as for an educational purpose. But I think once we broaden that to see that a student's housing or food or basic needs is a part of that, it's a part of the full picture, then we can kind of start to open some doors and think differently than we may have otherwise. And great partners for us have been financial aid, IT, institutional research, right? So getting those folks around the table to understand what data do we have, what data can we pull together from different sources, has been a huge help for us.
Great, that's so helpful. And thank you for your comments on sort of the persistence and the outcomes there. There's a pretty hefty body of research in K-12 that shows that access to SNAP and benefits directly impacts test scores. And this has been less researched in the higher ed field, but I've been encouraged to see a few studies emerging recently that are starting to show this connection. But yeah, that is incredibly important, and we need to change the way we talk about that. At this point, I think all three of you at some point have mentioned the issue of stigma and overcoming that with students. And I know there's a question in the Q&A box that is getting a lot of thumbs up. So I thought we'd just directly go to that. And Rashida, I'm hoping to start with you, but I would love to hear from all three of you. What are your thoughts on how benefits access efforts can break through some of that student stigma that we inevitably find?
Yeah, I think sort of Angela raised this up, that I think part of the process is that we have to get real about our own stigma and what we put on students, because sometimes students have they bring their own ideas about who should or shouldn't have access to supports, but we also put that on them. And I think we have to choose to own that and say, okay, so we're going to normalize that as a part of our learning process. As Mary mentioned, part of this is making sure that our campus community all know that this is a part of the mission of our work, and that, students, getting access to support and services not outside. So when we first started doing this work, in the California State University, we interviewed administrators and staff across our 23 institutions and found a very small proportion, but a vocal proportion really wasn't sure that this was our work, that we are not a social service agency is what I would hear. But we are academic and educational agencies. And if we want our students to learn, we have to be involved and leaders in this work. And so I think part of this is us addressing how we couch, how we label what we're doing, that this isn't about supporting students' needs, it's about forwarding access. And I think both research on students and staff and administrators shows that's the case.
Great, thanks. Angela or Mary, anything to add on that around student stigma?
Yeah, I want to jump in here from a student's perspective, because where we started, similar to what Rashida said, is that we started in a discussion with students, because we spent a lot of time with our marketing team trying to deal with the stigma, because there was a lot of discomfort when we were bringing together, cross-functional teams and talking through that. There was a lot of challenges around this is not, people are going to be uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about benefits. And so we worked with our marketing team to come up with some language that did not sit well or fall well with students. And so students said, if you're talking about SNAP, say SNAP. And that was so important for us to really get their feedback, and then working with student leaders, because back to the point that we have peer financial coaches really helping us with this work. In fact, we have a video from a student who was a peer financial coach who received benefits, and she now is an employee so many years later, who was very instrumental in helping us talk about how these services and benefits help support her and her family during this temporary transition in time. Our students wanted us to be very frank. If you're talking about benefits, if you're talking about SNAP, say SNAP, and don't beat around the bush. And I think that was so important for us to, back to what Rashida said, is to not create the environment that makes them uncomfortable. If they're comfortable with the language that they know and understand in the community, we have to use the same language. And that's what we did. And we made that transition, and we had to be really transparent about that. But our students really know best, right? They told us what we should be saying to help other students understand it. And we made that transition. In fact, we're doing some more transitioning now from our students and getting more feedback and being more clear and plain in our language.
That's super helpful. Mary, go ahead.
I would just add a little bit to that. One of the things, I actually think the pandemic in a lot of ways has helped us as administrators and as institutions to talk more about this and to be more open and honest about what's going on in the lives of our students. But I will also say that one of the things that's been really effective for us, and I don't know if it's so much stigma breaking as much as it is just making things accessible, is that we ask this question in a lot of spaces. So you come to meet with an academic advisor and you check in, we ask the question, are you having any trouble affording your groceries? Or, things like that, that we put it in all the places. So it doesn't have to be that you have to find the office in the corner and, look for somebody that can help you, right? Or peek around to the campus cupboard, right? Like, it is out there. We created a form, our essential needs form. It used to just be for emergency aid. And we said all these students that need emergency aid could also benefit from learning about our cupboard and our other resources. So now it's all one form. So you may be coming because you had an emergency with your car, or you need help with textbooks, but now we're also going to ask you the questions about food and childcare and transportation and all the above. And so I think that really putting it out there and having it be a question, just like we ask all other types of questions all the time of our students, helps it to see that it's not something to be ashamed about. It's something that's very common. It's every day, and we're here to help you. So I think that's been really effective for us.
Great. I want to transition to Q&A. I just want to give everybody one last chance, one piece of advice or one tip for other institutions who are starting to tackle this issue on their campuses.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I do think bringing students to the conversation early, if you have student leaders, if you have student clubs and organizations that might really be able to help support the conversation around that, because you know, as you learn what you want to do and how you can provide that and the service you want to provide, I think really understanding the students' needs and then the ways in which students would be comfortable with some of these supports and services. And I think it's the comfort that Mary talked about, because in our food pantry, we also provide information. So really trying to look at everything holistically. Certainly understanding your student population is important, but as you start to do that and the data, and I know Rashida's going to talk about, we got to look at some of the data to get us sort of started, but I think it's also bringing students to the conversation and helping them to help you shape the experiences that are going to benefit their effort, their support, and their success.
Great, thank you. Mary?
I think something that's really important when we think about the model of, let's say, like change leadership, right? When you want to make a change on your campus, one of the things you have to do is build your network and build your champions. So when you're getting into this work, you can't do it alone. One office can't do it by themselves. One person can't do it by themselves. So find the people who are in the work with you, whether that's across the aisle, you know, if you're in student affairs, looking over in academic affairs, but also in your community. I mean, we have so many great community partners and nonprofits that we work with all the time. We couldn't do the work without them, right? Because when a student comes to us with a need, we need to find a resource. And so building that network is a great first step.
Yep.
Before you go proactive, right? Because you want to be able to make sure that you've got some solutions for those students that do come forward. So that would be my piece of advice, is just find your allies.
It's a great piece of advice. And Rashida,
Yeah.
take us home.
Well, I think true leadership is asking hard questions with answers that sometimes bear hard results. And the work that we have done in California for the segment, the California State University, which is again 23 institutions across the state, our work really started with our chancellor, then Timothy White, who commissioned our research on basic needs. And I asked him, because he then, for the rest of his tenure, got hammered because the numbers were high. Our numbers were high that we had students experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. And then our students really held our feet to the fire forever about what are we going to do to address this, and how are our other policies then reinforcing the problems that we have.
Yeah.
And I asked him, why did you do this? Like, I'm glad you did this, but you know, they're outside your door picketing about this, and you're the one who commissioned the result in the first place. And he said, that's my job. That's my responsibility to lift this up and then respond to it. So one of the points that I'm making is that we have to invest in making sure that we are aware and that we're responding to the needs, but also pointing out that we've had support from the top in terms of our chancellor's office, but really it's the students. We have to listen to our students and engage them in partnership, because really they are the ones quite often making sure that we know what's going on and what's needed. And so they are our number one partners in this work, and we have to be responsive to them, even though they change, they come and they go, but they still are the people that know what are needed the most.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much. I could talk to the three of you all day long, but we do have some questions in the Q&A box. We are short on time, so I'm going to encourage a pretty rapid response to some of these questions. And yes, we will welcome back Stephanie for anybody who has questions about the toolkit. I want to ask one question from Ruben, and he asks, curious how many people are experiencing challenges with their local social services in terms of training eligibility workers on student eligibility, capacity, and approval. We have drastically increased our outreach and applications, but counties are really struggling. Curious if anybody has had direct experience with that. And also in the chat, if you have had experience with that, please chime in.
So I can say we had early challenges early on, some years ago. We've been in this work for about 11 years now. We did have some early challenges, but I think it's transitioned. I think lots of transition, even pre-pandemic. I think we've gotten lots of folks to kind of get on board. Because we are county funded as an institution, we often have the discussion about your county clients are our students, and they're kind of the same folks, and we're doing this work together. So I think we've gotten a better partnership. We are still trying to move though through a data sharing agreement, and that's some of the work that's happening. But we were actually having some folks that'll join some of our off-campus sites that'll help support this work from the social work aspect of it. So right now we're moving in a really good direction.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, as we are all struggling to keep up with the different changing exemptions for students, so are agencies, and so there are naturally going to be challenges as we move forward. I think we have time for one more question, and this is from a participant who's saying, what are the different forms of outreach you've used, and what forms have you found the most success with? I think many of you have experimented with several options.
Yeah, we have been doing a lot with text messaging. So that has been recent for us, and two-way text messaging. So where the student can respond and our team can respond back to them. So we use the data, we get a student list, depending on what the benefit is, right? We may be announcing like, you know, LIHEAP is opening or something along those lines, right? And then use that opportunity. The other outreach effort that we've had that's been really helpful is just, again, having those alert options. So if your college or institution has an early alert system, midterm grade report, or first week census report, like whatever it is where faculty are reporting back to you on students, if you can have something where they could select, like, I think this student would benefit from some outreach, and even if it's more specific than that related to basic needs, that has been really impactful, because students tend to go to their faculty first, and faculty tend to be the first that notice that students have those needs.
Yeah, appreciate it, Angela. Any other thoughts on that question?
I want to leave space for Angela because she's practicing, but I want to just lift up Ruben, who's out there in the audience. I want to quote him, and he says, you know, if we can use data to get students to pay their bills and fees, we can use data to determine who is likely going to need these support services and reach out with that to them with love and care. And again, I think framing rather in terms of need, but in terms of support is key. Our language is key.
In addition to what Mary mentioned, we, as I mentioned earlier, we do have information in our syllabi for our faculty. And we also have gotten faculty to put information on their Shell course in our LMS, or in our Blackboard is the LMS that we use for online courses or even supplemental instruction courses. And then we also do certainly lots of email in addition to two-way texting and some of those kind of things. But we do integrated collateral in different service areas, so to make sure that the food pantry knows about the support services and various things like that, so that it's all integrated across the college.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful and such a rich conversation. And thank you all who joined us today. Really hope that you found some of this conversation valuable. We are going to pull up a short feedback survey. Please let us know what you liked, what you would change about this webinar, and please go check out the Higher Ed Toolkit. Would love for many, many folks to use it and implement on your campus. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.